Well, hello, everybody. Hope you're all doing well out there. It is Friday. It's been a while since I did a Friday show, and I wanted to do this show because I'm sure most of you are aware that I did a debate on Mystery Babylon on all things eschatology against um, Garden or Elvin Israel. So I'm not sure if you all saw that or not, but I did on my channel do a video on this called "How Rome Became Babylon." And I thought I should make a part two because I really learned a lot after I made that one in preparation for this debate. So I want to share with you some of the things I learned doing this research. For those of you who are interested in studying this topic, and really take a little more time to go through my presentation. I only had 20 minutes on the debate, so this debate is not a Monday morning quarterback to maybe go back and redo some things I did in the debate. The debate is there. You can watch the debate. I don't like when people do debates and they go on their channel and they try to break everything down. Um, because I think it's good to just leave the debate as it is. I don't really get too active in the comments section either. I don't think it's out of respect to my opponent. I just I think it's good just to leave the debate where it is and not making a addendum to it where I defend or make a stronger argument when I'm on my own channel and I have all the time in the world. So that's not my purpose. My purpose is to make really a part two of my "How Rome Became Babylon" video and use my presentation and just kind of put this out there. And also, before I get started here, I'll maybe catch up and talk a little bit about what's been going on. Hold on a second. I was in Moldova. I made some videos while I was out there. And um before I left, there was William Bell made a whole 4-part series based on a question that I asked when he was in a debate. And I made 2 response videos, and I didn't get a chance to watch his part 4, but I watched his part 3. And I really just want to put that out there before I start this, that I'm letting the issue go because I don't want to just harp on the issue. Maybe we'll come back to it, but I really wish he would have a discussion with me. He hasn't even answered my. I left a comment on the last video and saying, "Hey, you're kind of mischaracterizing some things I said and me a little bit, and I'd like to at least have the chance to talk to you openly and clear these things up." And so he doesn't respond to me. So I just think it's a little weird that I'm important enough to make a 4-part series, or my question's important enough to make a 4-part series, but I'm just not important enough to respond to even in the comments section. So I just I'm hoping maybe he hears it, or maybe one of you, maybe someone who knows him, can reach out and just share that and say, hey, why, what would hurt to have a discussion? Like, what is the big deal, right? Why can't we just have a discussion? Because people are coming on my channel asking me questions about my response video, and people are going over there and say, hey, why don't we just talk? So, but I'm not gonna harp on it. I'm gonna let it go. I explain I explain where I'm coming from with that. And I also want to put a disclaimer with this Mystery Babylon position. And before we get into this presentation, that I really don't have an axe to grind here. And I know that's hard for people to believe because there's so much debate and division, and people have their views that they want to defend. And so anytime someone hears something against a particular view, they feel like that person's on the other team and whatever. I'm really not. My whole purpose here is to try to explore these things and understand the truth. What is the truth? What did John, who wrote Revelation, what did he mean when he said Mystery Babylon? What was he talking about? And so that's why I had to step away and become neutral, because I found that all through this channel, all through this journey, the last 5 years, everything I've done was filtered through a particular view, and I had to defend the view, and I had to look at the information in light of the view. So I said, what if I just threw it all out and just said, you know what, forget about worrying about a view. Let me just focus on trying to understand what the author is saying. Let me just try to figure out and this has been the best for me. For me, it's been the best way to look at the Bible. These scriptures have become more clear than ever. I haven't got a course. I'm still studying. I got a lot to go. There's a lot you kind of come to the point where you say, I don't really know anything. But on the other side of that, it's never been easier for me to look at these texts and to try to find the best interpretation that sits right with me, and I'm not, pulling my hair out, being frustrated and all that. There's a lot to go. We have a lot to learn, but for me, this has been the best way to interpret it. And so I'm kind of at odds with all of you. For the most part, at least on this issue here, I think maybe one person agrees with me, that at least I know has watched the debate. And so it's one of those issues where I think that the people who wanted me to do this debate, the person that challenged me to this debate, it wasn't Elvin, it was someone else. I think that they were expecting an easy win and kind of a point for the full preterist. And I don't think they got that. I don't think I definitively won this debate, because you can make an argument for the other side and it makes sense. But I don't think it was an easy win, as some people thought. Not even him, but even some other people who emailed me who are not preterists and said, hey, I don't think you should do this debate. You're given an easy win here. You're not going to be able to, how are you going to defend this? And so I think that, I think I at least showed enough evidence to make you second guess, or maybe think that there's something more. And if nothing else, at least what you can learn from this, what I'm going to present here and from the debate, is that no matter how much something makes sense, you should always be brave enough to look at things critically, or not even critically, in depth. Look at things in depth and look at other views. Consider all the views, because you're going to find by looking at another view, it might poke holes in what you believe. So I did all my research on Rome and why it fit. And then the last thing I did before I did this debate, my final preparations, was I read as much as I could in the time that I had of Who Is This Babylon by Don Preston. And so that, when I started reading that, it really challenged me. So hold on, I got to work a little harder. So I had to work a little harder, but again, I didn't have to fit it into a particular review. If I had read Who Is This Babylon and I felt that my view was debunked, I probably would have gave it a call, call Phelan up and say, hey, I'm out. I'm not going to do the debate because I've been proven wrong. But that didn't happen. And so I hope that everyone appreciates that. I hope that you understand that you could accuse me of a lot of things and say that I flip-flopped here and there. Maybe you don't like me. Maybe you don't like my videos or whatever. Maybe you think I'm nuts. But I think everyone could agree, or I hope you will agree, that I've been honest all this time. And I have not been looking out to just try to promote anything. And so, part of me didn't even want to elaborate on this any further, but, I asked myself that question: does the truth matter? Does it matter? Yes, the truth matters. So I think there's some good, I'm not trying to debunk full preterism. I don't think it's true, but why not just leave it alone? All right. I think there's a lot of good things about it. One of the best things is people who are full preterists are not looking for a future apocalyptic type of catastrophe. And our world has been just plagued by people who We're looking to their future, reading these texts into their own time period, and thinking there's going to be some great catastrophe, or they're going to be the ones that are a part of this. I posted on my community page on YouTube. I posted on Facebook too about um, this this apocalyptic group in China in the 19th century that led to 20 to 30 million deaths. So yeah, part of me just says just leave full preterism alone. At least they're not looking out for a future apocalypse or something like that. But I have to say the truth matters. And whenever you're in a situation where you're not sure what the right thing to do is, I think the truth is what works. And so if you're comfortable with your view, if full preterism has changed your life and it's brought you closer to God, then don't watch this video, right? Don't watch my stuff. But if you want to dig deeper, and if you want to try to 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 I'm not so that's the difficulty, because I'm not trying to make these things future, and I'm saying they're not all fulfilled in the past. So there's the reason why I'm neutral. And there's other ways. I hope what I hope to do in the future is to be able to look at other ways that we can interpret these things. What I'm doing right now is just trying to understand what the author is saying here. What do these texts mean? But then maybe down the road we can look at, how are we going to interpret these things? I think that there's more than one way. I think that there's a definite authorial intent behind this. Let's take Revelation, for example. I think that John is talking about the Roman Empire here, and I think that it's very relevant to the time that he's living in, and we'll go through it all. So for the author and for the people who are written it meant a specific thing. But the big picture of it, you can apply. You can apply to your life now. You can apply to our time now. Just can't apply it in the literal way of where this thing's going to happen and these and these catastrophes, apocalyptic visions, they have to come to pass. They're in our future, and when that happens, everything's going to be set right, because the apocalyptic idea is not just about salvation. It's about setting things right in the world. And so I have a different view of how we set things right in the world. I don't believe that we need a catastrophe where there's bloodshed and war and carnage in order to bring in, a new order or set things right. And I don't believe it was that way in the past. I don't believe that the 66 to 70 AD war needed to happen to realize the things that Jesus taught, the values that Jesus taught, his teachings that they could put into action then and bring about a positive change. That it's the same now. We can look at the things that Jesus taught us, and we can bring about a positive change in the world. One of the things is to love your enemies. Why did he say that? I mean, it makes sense, right? I want to love my enemies. I think you should. I try to pray as much as I can for the people who give me the most trouble in my life. Why? Well, because if I don't do that, it's going to be a continuous cycle of not getting along with each other and hatred, and that eventually, in its most extreme, leads to horrible things. And so we see our world where we have this continuous cycle of violence, war after war after war. And so I think Jesus gives us the formula to have peace, and that is forgiveness. That is to love our enemies. Is it to be pacifist? Is it to be weak? No. It's because if we don't break the cycle, it'll just continue on. And he's given us what we need to know. He's given us what we need to know through the scriptures, through his teachings, of how we can be at peace with each other and have a relationship with God, and how we can understand God through him. He reveals God to us because he's one of us. He's a human. And I think that relationship piece is the biggest part, beyond all this other stuff, is to have that relationship. And I posted this on Facebook, but and All Things Eschatology has a Facebook page. If you want to go over there, All Things Eschatology Facebook, I did post this, but there was a video by one of my favorite YouTube YouTube channels, Rabbi Simon Jacobson, and he coined an acronym called SPA, and it stands for study, prayer, and action. And it was very profound message. And I think that what Jesus taught, right? Put things into action. What James taught. Prayer, taught us to pray. Study, right? Study the scriptures, know the scriptures. Jesus quoted a lot of scriptures. And so I think that those are the things that are most important, not some apocalyptic catastrophe that'll fix things for us. Now we could say, well, why not just full preterism then? I mean, it's past, it happened, let's just move on. Well, I don't that's where I think the truth matters. And I think that what ends up happening is it's not even just about the truth. It's what I'm hearing is, even in the debate, is kind of the same old things that we hear in fundamentalism, right? You pick the view, you defend the view at all costs, right? You kind of shun away from this. If something may have pose a problem to your view, you get away from it, and you form you kind of form these boxes to put around it. And there's just, I mean, there's, I even heard, I was watching some full preterist channels and stuff, and one was talking about a cappella music, that they don't, they have a problem with. It's a Church of Christ thing, I guess, to have instruments. And so you're, here it presents itself as some spiritual liberating idea, but then you're creating things like, hey, no a cappella music. Some of these full preterist Church of Christ preachers, they still believe in, they have water baptism. They gotta have water baptism to be regenerated, baptismal regeneration. And so it just becomes kind of like your own thing, right? You just make up whatever rules that you want. You make up, you find out, hey, I want to keep this and get rid of this. And it just becomes another religion. And so that's where I think I have a biggest problem with this full preterist movement, is that it's just becoming another religion, another denomination. And that's fine, but let's just recognize what it is. And I just want everyone to recognize that doesn't work for me. Right? I am part of a religion. I do go to church and I do have a denomination, but that church and that pastor and those people allow me the freedom that most churches in my life haven't. So it kind of works for me. And the main focus is really focusing on those core values that Jesus taught, and having a relationship and with God, and having community, and taking care of people, helping people, raising my kids in a good environment, and having activities, and having support, and having people around us. When my son had a really complicated operation, a pastor comes by my house and we read the Psalms. He prayed with us. And that's really like, that really means a lot to me. And I think that if you just I would never want to lose that. So I'm in a good place spiritually, relationship wise, with in my spiritual walk. And I can have these things. I can dive deep. I can even be critical of the scriptures. But I can have my community, and my church and family and all that. For me, it just kind of all works together. Now, I'm not saying that what I'm what I believe in or what I do is right for everybody. I'm just trying to let you know who I am, where I'm coming from. And so I say all that because I hope that this lesson I'm about to give, you just take it as, look, maybe there's something, maybe there's something to it, but it's not going to, right. It's not going to, it's not going to change your walk, your spiritual walk. It's just, we can learn. Um, we can learn. And again, my number one thing here, my number one agenda here is just the truth. The truth matters. I want to know what John of Revelation was saying. What was he talking about? So I'm going to start the presentation here. So I based my argument on 5 key characteristics of Mystery Babylon. And those 5 key characteristics start out here with the great harlot, the mother of harlots. I knew this would be a tough one, and I knew it would be where the argument would really, a big part of the argument would lie. So I go ahead and give the objection, right? So Rome was never married to God. So how could she be labeled as a harlot? It's a fair question. If it's a fair objection. Well, you're going to find, and what I found in preparing for this is the answers really are in the Tanakh, in the Old Testament. I really could have made my entire argument out without looking at any outside sources. There's just so much. Just when you think, I mean, everyone understands that the book of Revelation is full of quotes from the Old Testament. And I thought there was a lot to begin with. And I found out through this study that there's just way more than I was even aware of. So as far as that objection, if Rome was never married to God, how could she be labeled as a harlot? Well, we get Nahum with Nineveh. So Nineveh is called a harlot. Nahum 3:4, and all for the countless harlotries of the harlot, graceful of deadly charms, who betrays nations with her harlotries and people with her charms. So why are they called harlots? They're a Gentile nation. They're not married like Israel. Spiritual and moral corruption. As a harlot, Nineveh is seducing other nations into alliances that are leading to their manipulation and ruin. So that's the definition of a harlot here, to a Gentile nation. Nineveh, part of the Assyrian Empire. And Tyre. And if you read the whole chapter of Isaiah 23, and you'll just see so many parallels with the book of Revelation. You can see, oh, merchants of Sidon, Isaiah 23, 2-3. Oh, merchants of Sidon, your messengers passed over the sea and were on many waters. Right? Where do we hear that? Does that sound familiar? They lament over her fall. Wail, O ships of Tarshish. It's hard to say, Tarshish, for your stronghold is laid waste. It calls Tyre directly a harlot. O forgotten harlot. Tyre, as in the song of the harlot. Her merchandise and her hire will be dedicated to the Lord. And we see that merchandise and merchants of the sea has a lot to do with Revelation 18. And in verse 11 of Revelation 18, Revelation 18:11, and the merchants of the earth weep and mourn for her, since no one buys her cargo anymore. So I think this is just a strong parallel here between Tyre and Revelation and Babylon in Revelation 18. Babylon itself, I think this is the most straightforward explanation of why John calls Rome Babylon. Okay. Babylon was a city of the Chaldean Empire, just like Rome is the city of the Roman Empire. So Babylon destroys Jerusalem, Rome destroys Jerusalem, Babylon's a world power, Rome's a world power. I think that's the purpose of using Babylon for Rome, because you can't make any Old Testament precedent for calling Jerusalem Babylon. You can for Sodom. I think Elvin did a great job of even Egypt there, because even Revelation 11:9 talks about spiritual Sodom in Egypt where our Lord was crucified. Of course, that's talking about Jerusalem, but there is no Old Testament precedent for calling Jerusalem Babylon, inside or outside of the scriptures. And so we see that Babylon was not married to God like Israel, but she is being talked about as the same way that we see Revelation 18:7-8. Since in her heart she says, "A queen I sit, I am no widow, mourning I shall never see." Revelation or Isaiah 47:8, 47:8-9. I am, and there is no one besides me. I shall not sit as a widow or know the loss of children. And I have Don Preston's "Who is this Babylon?" He says the echo of Genesis 49 and Revelation 5:5 becomes a thunderous chorus in Revelation as we witness the burning and stoning of the adulterous harlot. Now, again, he believes it's Jerusalem, who refuses to acknowledge that she is now unmarried. I sit as a queen. I am no widow. So he's tying Revelation 18:7 to the harlot imagery of the Old Testament, or the fact that Jerusalem is called a harlot and she's married to God. But the direct parallel of this statement of "a queen I sit, I am no widow" is directly from Isaiah 47:8-9, and is talking about Babylon. We see that the context here, Isaiah 47:1-3, "Come down and sit in the dust, O virgin daughter of Babylon." Talks about her nakedness being uncovered. And he even says in his book, one of the punishments in the ancient world for an adulteress was to be publicly stripped naked. And here it's talking about Babylon in the Old Testament, this city Babylon that was the head of the Neo-Chaldean Empire, just like Rome was the city that was the head of the Roman Empire. Babylon destroyed Jerusalem, Rome destroyed Jerusalem. There's the connection between Babylon and Rome. And so one of the comments that I misunderstood was one by Mike Harris, and he said, well, Mystery Babylon. If it's a mystery, what would be so mysterious about it? Well, again, if you look up the literal definition of mystery, right, it's a secret. I don't know. I mean, is the number and the name of the beast, is that kept a secret too? We see gematria being used there. It seems like nobody wants to directly call out the empire in a letter. That's what it seems like to me. It's not just in Revelation, it's in other texts of the time, with the exception of the Sibylline oracles. They call it out. So I think that, I don't know, I could be wrong. I'm not planting my flag on that hill. I'm not making that a strong position. But that would just be my, out of everything I've read and seen throughout this study, this research, it would make sense to me why they would not want to come out and call it Rome, right? That they would want to use another name for it and call it a mystery, because in the in the passage it's easy to determine as Jerusalem. It just goes ahead and says the city where our Lord was crucified. We know that's Jerusalem, right? Anyway, we're moving on. So this whole idea of idolatry and unfaithfulness, the harlotry, or no, not idolatry. We're looking at passages that deal with harlotry. Okay, so what I did was, here's the old, and I shortened my presentation for the debate. So what I did for this video is I'm adding in slides that I took out. So we're looking at Old Testament passages that refer to Israel as a harlot. And so that's where I think that I took this view of Jerusalem also being the harlot, because just Ezekiel 16 is just, man, it's just a scathing, it's just, I don't know how many times it calls Israel. It's like, I made one video where it was like, hey, there should be no confusion, right? It's so obvious who is being talked about here. But if we dig into the details here, we see Jeremiah, why the whole point that I want to make here, it's not how many times she's called a harlot. It's just, why is she being called a harlot? So we're going to go through all of them here. Jeremiah 2:20, idolatry and spiritual unfaithfulness. Jeremiah 3:6-8, idolatry and syncretism. Ezekiel 16, 29, 26 through 29, political alliances and idolatry. Remember that, political alliances. Ezekiel 16, 20 through 21, idolatry and child sacrifice. Isaiah 121, moral and social corruption. Ezekiel 23, 30, idolatry with foreign nations. So, idolatry with foreign nations, um, child sacrifice at Tophet, pagan practices, all of these things, not all of them. I mean, some of them, spiritual unfaithfulness and things like you could tie into the first century. But there's two big ones here that don't fit. First off, there was no child sacrifice going on. The whole idea of idolatry. Now Elvin did, give me a text on idolatry, but it's I'm sorry, but it's not the same. It's not the same as Israel as a nation. This is when Paul is going out to preach the gospel to Gentiles, right? It's different than Israel's Judah. I excluded the northern tribes. I excluded Hosea because we're talking about Judah here. So Judah's idolatry was really remedied in the first century through the reforms of Ezra and Nehemiah, and we see that they were putting fences through Phariseeism and synagogue worship. They really that was one of the charges against them by to be legalists. So they were not breaking the Torah like they were in Ezekiel. It's different. And as far as having one of these ideas of harlotry in the Old Testament is about alliances with other nations. And so in the first century, there were no more alliances. They were when you were part of the Roman Empire, I mean, you didn't have any sovereignty at all. Israel had no sovereignty. The only way you can make it work is to say that the high priest and the king of Judea, which would be the Herod, the first Herod, and the other ones became less in power. But that is completely different than looking at when Israel had a king, like let's say in the days of Hezekiah or Josiah, when they were sovereign, right? They still had to get along with they still had to have some type of relationship with the nations around them, but that was a harlotry back then. They would make a adulterous relationship with one of the nations. But here, and with Rome, it's totally different. They don't have the sovereignty, right? Rome appointed the high priest. Rome put Herod in charge, and when Herod, the first Herod died, they started bringing procurators in there. They had more power. They limited the Herods, but still, even up to the Jewish-Roman War, it was Herod Agrippa II making calls. They were client kings, so it's a whole different setup. So, I'll just read here. So Revelation's harlot aligns more closely with Tyre, Nineveh, and Babylon due to shared themes of idolatry, economic exploitation, political corruption, and persecution. Unlike these cities, first century Jerusalem was under Roman rule, lacked political power, and following the reforms of Ezra, Nehemiah, and the Pharisees, was no longer charged with idolatry in the New Testament. I think there was one. No, we'll move on. Oh, it's here. Yep. The great. I was looking for a quote that I wanted to read, but it wasn't there. So the great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth, attempts to make this Jerusalem, to say that Jerusalem had dominion over the kings of the earth. Even if you make kings of the land, even if you translate that to land, what land are you referring to? Even if you limit that land to the region of Judea, Rome had control over that. There was no sovereignty. Any decision that they made was connected to Rome as the head, and that's the point here. Rome is the head. Rome is the one who has dominion over the kings of the earth. Um, and I covered this a lot because you will hear. I hope that one thing that came out of this that I won't hear anymore, or won't hear as much, is when someone says, Babylon, the city where our Lord was crucified. I hear that so many times. It's one of my big pet peeves, because in Revelation 11:8 it says, and their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city that is symbolically called Sodom and Egypt, where their Lord was crucified. Now, that's one of 8 times that the term great city appears in Revelation. The one time that it appears, and I believe it's referring to Jerusalem, it tells you. The other times it doesn't. The city where our Lord was crucified. So the interpretation is, by people who take the Jerusalem interpretation, the full preterist position, and some partial preterists would maybe do the same. I don't know, but I've just heard the full. I've heard IO, and I've heard full preterists make this claim, where they say Babylon, the city where our Lord was crucified, but it never says that. You can look at that's Siri. Thought I said something. Anyway, um, I have it right here. If you want these slides, let me know. I'll send them to you. I'll email them to you. Revelation 14:8, Revelation 16:19, 17:18, 18:10, 18:16, 18:18 through 19, 18:21 is where this term great city. So I said, well, what do we do? Let's look to the Old Testament to see if there's precedent. And when you know, there is. So you can put that one to rest, because in the Old Testament, great city applies to Gentile nations 5 of the 7 times it appears. And all those 5 times, they're Gentile cities in the Assyrian Empire. Nineveh 4 times, Rezin 1 time, and Jerusalem 2 times. So, great city can mean Jerusalem, and it can mean any Gentile city, any great city. And Jerusalem was a great city. She just didn't have dominion over the kings of the earth like Rome did. Even if you want to make that, you can make that spiritual. You can make that spiritual, but is that does that line up with all the other things that we're seeing? This description. That's what you have to decide. If you think it's spiritual, okay, you could go with that. But does it line up with everything else? Is it the most likely candidate? What is the probability that it fits that more than Rome? Well, we'll go on here. All right. So right here, Revelation 17:18, and the woman that you saw is the great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth. So she is the city. Okay. The woman is the city. And so if this city has dominion over the kings of the earth, we see in Revelation 19:19, I saw the beast and the kings of the earth with their armies gathered to make war against him who sits upon the horse and against his army. So obviously this is Jesus who sits on the horse in his army. And it's the beast and the kings of the earth who come to make war against him. Well, let's just try to do the math here. So if the woman has dominion over the kings of the earth, and the kings of the earth are gathered to make war against him who sits on the horse, what is the beast doing there? Because the beast, most people, that's why I wanted to know Elvin's position on the beast. If the beast is also Rome, most people, partial and full, will say the beast is Rome, but the woman is Jerusalem. Well, does it make sense that you would have the entity that had dominion over the kings of the earth, the woman, which is the city, teaming up with the beast to make war on Jesus here? And everyone agreed 19 is this is the second coming. And so most would say that it was the Roman army that was the instrument of the second coming, of the destruction of Jerusalem. And so if the Roman army is the instrument, why are they making war against Jesus here, who sits on the horse? And these kings of the earth that are supposed to answer to the woman who has dominion over them, and The beast is the one who destroys the woman, the city. Rome destroys Jerusalem. It would seem you got a mess here. You got just a logical mess. And we see that, and my really what I want to explain here is that there's a connection between the beast and the woman. Now, if you believe that the whole thing is Jerusalem, that's a whole nother argument. And Elvin did say that he believes it's the Pharisees, which completely threw me off because I think that's just the most far out view I've ever heard. And I'll be honest with you, if I knew going into this that that was his view, I would not have done the debate. I asked for his view. I was not allowed to know. Right? I shared all my information beforehand because I wanted to have an informed debate. SoCal Preston taught me that. He sends his stuff out. So I'm just going to be like SoCal. I'm going to inform my opponent. They would not let me know his view. I wasn't even going to share that, but whatever. And it wasn't Elvin who organized it. So I'm not blaming Elvin. I don't know if it was his thing. It was the person who organized it would not give me the information. And so what I'm saying is I wouldn't have even done the debate if I knew that. Because the majority view is that Rome is the beast, the woman is Jerusalem, and they have a falling out. That's Don Preston's view. And who is this Babylon? That there's a relationship that goes wrong and that it goes sour. And that's when the beast destroys the harlot. But I'm coming from that perspective because I'm saying there's a relationship between the woman, between the city, and the beast. Because the woman has dominion over the kings of the earth. The beast is given authority over every tribe and every language. And it's even one of these bowl judgments gets poured out on the throne of the beast. So it's not just the woman that's getting destroyed, burned up. It's the beast too. They're both going down. They're connected. All right. And so this is a quote from Josephus, just kind of explaining, again, to make another point about the sovereignty that Jerusalem did not have in the first century because of the Roman takeover, not just of Judea, but of the whole world at that time. So Josephus says, for we lost our freedom and became subject to the Romans. The royal power which had formerly been bestowed on those who were high priests by birth became the privilege of commoners. And this is from The Clash of Ancient Civilizations by Martin Goodman. He says, in political terms, the Mediterranean world was more unified under Rome in the first 2 centuries CE than it had ever been before, and that it has ever been since. The brutal reality of the Roman Empire was that the power of the emperor could reach almost every corner of this world. And if you read Josephus, before the rebellion, Herod Agrippa II was warning them not to go to war with Rome because he went through detail about all these different territories and how some of the strongest nations out there they controlled from Rome, and we had this era of just, it says this is the Mediterranean world was unified under Rome than it had ever been before or ever has been. They figured out how to rule the world. They had dominion over the kings of the earth. They had dominions over the kings of the land too. So however you want to translate it, Rome is the most obvious. And again, with these 5 points, if even one of these points does not fit Jerusalem, it can't be Jerusalem. If just one of these points does not fit Rome, it can't be Rome. And this point does not fit Jerusalem. She did not have dominion. And it's so anyway, I made that point, not to overdo it. Anyway, point 3, she sits on a scarlet beast. So if Rome is Babylon, this is the objections that I got through email going back and forth with other people. Oh, if Rome is Babylon, how does Rome ride Rome? Because that's the whole idea. Again, another reason why I wouldn't have done the debate if I'd known that Elvin didn't believe that Rome was the beast and was the Pharisees. This is the understanding, partial preterist, full preterist, Don Preston. I even said that since I don't know the view, I'm just going to assume it's Don Preston's view. That's why I have a lot of Don Preston stuff in it. Okay. He's the authority. He would be the, what I would say, the authority on it for the view of Jerusalem. So I'd use the authority. And he says that Rome, and Kenneth Gentry would say this too, Rome, Babylon rides the beast, right? The woman is sitting on the beast and she rides the beast. So the beast is in control, has this control, but the woman rides the beast. So if Rome is Babylon, then how does Rome ride Rome? It's a faulty premise because they're connected. But look at this picture. I mean, does not this not just say it all, right? And we understand that the 7 heads are 7 mountains, which the woman is seated, and they're also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come, and when he does, he must remain only a little while. Okay, so these are Roman emperors. They're also they're 7 mountains. So these hills represent the Roman Empire, but they also represent the individual kings. So it's a corporate idea and it's an individual idea. But the woman sits on it. And so here we have this depiction of this Roman coin minted by Vespasian, 69 to 71. And so is it just a coincidence that John uses the same imagery? Is it just that'd be a pretty big coincidence. But if you just say, well, okay, on that coin, what else can we learn from it? Well, we can learn, let's break down the coin. Okay. It's not only a woman sitting on 7 hills. We can count them up there. You can count them. 7 hills. We can see the S and the C. It stands for, it's a Latin term for the Senate. So that means that this is a coin that was minted, that was distributed throughout the empire. So it would have been distributed throughout the 7 churches. They would have seen this. They have known about it. We also see underneath the woman, there's a little, it's actually a she wolf. So that's going back to Rome's origins. So they're very, they think of the supernatural origins of Rome. They depict these things in the coin. It's a patriotic pride type thing. And the woman is victorious. She's sitting in military attire. So she's sitting proudly, looking victorious. And that Roma underneath there is not just, no, I did my first video, that's why I'm doing a part 2. I just said, well, I know Roma is the Italian word for Rome, but that's not what it is. Roma is the woman, and Roma was a female deity, and she personified not only the city, but the Roman state. So just like John, just like in Revelation, we have this idea of a woman that sits on the 7 hills, and the 7 hills are Roman emperors, and they're also the broader idea of the Roman Empire. They're she personifies that. She's a personification of Rome, the city and the empire. And I'll read here. She was created and promoted to represent and propagate certain of Rome's ideas about itself and to justify its rule. Okay. She was also depicted on coins before the 1st century. There's a coin from 87 to 88 BC showing the military might of Rome. This was propaganda. It was distributed throughout the empire. And this is a denarius. So even this Roman denarius was in circulation in the 1st century. So Roma was known. She is the spirit of Rome. They worshipped a pantheon of gods. They worshipped their emperors. There was the Roman imperial cult. This was a big deal to them. And this is a way that everyone throughout the empire gets to see their war propaganda. And so I think you see the opposite of Roma is this coin below, Judea Capta, where you see a Roman emperor standing behind the woman. The woman's Jerusalem. And the woman there is mourning. She's in subjection to Rome, Judea Capta. So they would put whoever captured, there was not just whatever territory they would capture or have some type of victorious battle. Of course, Judea was already captured at this time, but they would distribute these, in currency, and so people would know throughout the empire not to mess with Rome. This is war propaganda, and so I think it's just you know that's just too much of a coincidence for me that John uses this imagery. When I saw this coin, that was really what led me to start studying this idea about Rome. It was this coin alone that got me that got me saying, hey, what's going on here? How is that John uses this exact same imagery? I know some of you say, well, it was written before that, but Rome is known. I don't believe that, but Rome was known to be sitting on seven hills. And you could say, well, this one was sitting on seven hills. This one, um, and that was Robin debate. And someone say, well, Jerusalem sat on seven hills. I read a little bit about that, and one of the seven hills was where Antonia Tower sat on. If you know Antonia Tower, it was part of the temple complex, and they aren't very notable hills. Like give you an example. One of these seven hills in Rome are notable. One is the Palatine Hill, is where Augustus built his palace. So we even get the word palace from one of the hills of Rome. The Palatine Hill is where we get our word palace from, because Augustus erected his palace there. It's pretty amazing. And so, anyway, the other objection is, if Rome is Babylon, does Rome destroy Rome? Does she destroy herself? Well, what we have to understand is, just like that she-wolf from that coin, Rome was found in conflict. So Romulus and Remus, the founders of Rome, they were twin brothers. I believe they were twins. Yeah, twin brothers. So Romulus kills Remus, and there were writers, first century BC here, that said that this act kind of set Rome up for failure. And see, Livy here, 59 BC to 80 17. The spot where Remus was killed and buried was called Remoria, a name that survives to this day. This crime, the first in a city that would witness so many crimes in its long history, left a pollution that would never be expiated. Ovid here, Romulus, you were too harsh. Blood became the first foundation of the city, and that brother's murder was the first of your great deeds. Not only that, but Caesar and Pompey, 49 to 45 BC. Octavian versus Mark Antony, 32 to 30 BC. And then the year of four emperors, Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and Vespasian. In 69 AD, Vespasian takes over, and that was the year that the war was put on pause, and Rome had its own internal conflict. So Rome has been just internal conflict after one after the other. And so the idea that John could have a vision of Rome destroying itself is very much in line with history. But most importantly, it was prophesied by Isaiah. So in Revelation 17:16, it says, in the 10 horns that you saw, they and the beast will hate the prostitute. They will make her desolate and naked and devour her flesh and burn her up with fire. Isaiah 49:26 says, I will make your oppressors eat their own flesh. So John was going to communicate the oppressors of the people of God. Wouldn't it make sense, because he draws so much from the Old Testament, to use this passage from Isaiah 49:26? So let's read it again. Isaiah 49:26, it says, I will make your oppressors eat their own flesh. In Revelation 17:6, it says, they will make her desolate and naked and devour her flesh and burn her up with fire. All right. Drunk with the blood of the saints. I'm running out of time. Oh my gosh, been on for an hour just on the slides. There's a lot. This is a big topic, but we don't have to look too much further than Revelation itself, because who is it? It's the dragon. Then the dragon became furious, the woman, and went off to make war on the rest of her offspring, on those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. And he stood in the sand. So the dragon is the one who makes war, but then he gives his authority to the beast. And the beast, Revelation 13:7, also, it was allowed to make war on the saints and conquer them. So it's the dragon who empowers the beast, and the beast and the woman are related, like I've shown. So it's that whole system: the beast, the dragon, the woman, the city, the empire. They are the ones who are making war on the offspring in John's vision. John himself is in tribulation. I, John, your brother and partner in the tribulation and the kingdom and the patience endurance that are in Jesus was on the island called Patmos on account of the word of God and testimony of Jesus. So he is in tribulation due to this system, because who banished him to Rome? Who banished him to Patmos? Was it the high priest? Was it Sanhedrin? No. We know who banished him. So what would his perspective be? You're banished to Patmos. You know, you obviously know that you know about the persecution by Nero. You're writing to the 7 churches that are in the Roman Empire. He's not writing to Jerusalem to warn them to get out, like in the Olivet Discourse. This is different. This is not the same thing as what's going on in the Olivet Discourse, which I tried to not get into too much. But John is Revelation 11:15 sums up the whole big picture of this book, that the kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. This is what John is waiting for, to make things right. It's not just about salvation, it's about making things right. And at John's time that he's writing, he is in tribulation. He's in tribulation, and all these descriptions point to Rome. And no matter what you say about, hey, persecution of Saul of Tarsus, the letters to the synagogues, the stoning of Stephen, the quotes in the Olivet Discourse about all the blood coming on this generation, they killed the prophets. What you have to know is that the Neronian persecution between 64 and 68 is the only early of that time, before 70. I'll read it. The Neronian persecution is the only widespread state-sponsored persecution of Christians that is well documented before 70 AD. It's just a fact. We get Jesus, who in the book of Acts says, Herod, Pontius Pilate, along with the Gentiles and the people of Israel. That was who killed him. And so everyone has culpability there. People of Israel, Gentiles, Herod and Pontius Pilate, both Roman agents. Okay. You get John the Baptist killed by a Roman agent, Herod Antipas. James of Zebedee killed by a Roman agent, Herod Agrippa I. Stoning of Stephen killed by the Jewish leadership. See, it's not just one. It's not the good guys against the bad guys. There's a lot of bad. It's just you have to. It's a complicated web of internal and external battles here, especially with the Jewish-Roman War. But what we know from the New Testament, we get these are the accounts we get of martyrdom, and it's mainly Rome here. It's mainly even Rome. It's mainly at the head of Rome here. Even in the areas where you could say it's the Jewish leadership, you could say yes, stoning of Stephen, but the majority here, the majority of even the persecution and the killing here in the New Testament, Rome has its hands all over it. If you're saying, well, Herod wasn't, he was on. If you want to count Herod on the Jewish side of things, it doesn't work. They even had a name for him, Rex Amicus Populi Romani, interpreted as king and friend of the Roman people. So this was a title used by Rome to acknowledge loyal client kings, highlighted both the king's sovereignty and his special relationship with Rome. That was the Herod I. So one of the toughest ones, in her was found the blood of prophets and saints and of all who have been slain on the earth. Now you could say, well, you know, how is that Rome? Rome never killed the Old Testament prophets. You know, these, you know, how does that how does that add up to Rome? Well, that may be a tough one, but we can read in the literature around that time of what um, Jewish writers thought of Rome. Right? Sibylline Oracles, Book 5, 143, 158, 161. Woe to you, race of Latins, proud of your kingdoms, unclean in the blood of innocent men. Then the falling of Babylon will occur. There will be among men slaughtering and terrible destruction. Sibylline Oracles, Book 5, 155 to 161. Again, first century. And then there shall come from heaven a great star into the fearful sea, and it shall burn up the deep, and Babylon itself, and Italy, for whose sake many faithful saints of the Hebrews were destroyed, as well as the true temple. So it connects the destruction of the temple and faithful saints of the Hebrews being killed by Babylon, Rome. And so I'm running out of time here. I'm not going to read all these, just like in the debate, but the Dead Sea Scrolls, called Rome the Katim, Belial, right? They're the sons of darkness. The first attack of the sons of light shall be launched against the forces of the sons of darkness, the army of Belial, which later Belial became to be known as synonymous with Satan. So it's, put these things in their proper context. And so one of those things is, well, and again, we learn this debate a lot of times, there was interpretations of, well, this didn't literally happen, this was spiritual, this was symbolic, and this was literal. And I had to sift through that too. Maybe some would say I'm doing the same thing, but I don't know how else to I don't know how else to, maybe you can help me. I don't know how else to solve this issue, because um you know he read, and I was expecting these passages about it's impossible for a prophet to die. It's impossible for a prophet to die outside Jerusalem, or Jerusalem, Jerusalem, that stones those who are sent to it. It killed you from Abel to Zechariah. We know all the passages. So, what we do the math, and you look up how many prophets were killed by Jewish authorities, and we get one. We get I'll read it here. I did this research. In the Old Testament, there were approximately 33 prophets, including both major, minor, and other notable prophets. Among these, only Zechariah, son of Jehoiada, I'll not pronounce that, sorry, is explicitly documented as having been killed by Jewish authorities according to the biblical narrative. So it's like 3% of the prophets, not all the prophets. And I said in the debate, I'll say it here, you could add in Isaiah because it's alluded to in Hebrews, and that's extra biblical material, right? Ascension of Isaiah, and the Talmud talks about Manasseh, Saul, Isaiah, and 2. So even if I gave you 2, that's 2 out of 33. That's a far cry from 100%. So is this that it's impossible the prophet will die outside Jerusalem? Is that just being used hyperbolically? Because there was some of that going on at the time with the persecution of the early Christians. I don't know. But one of my biggest questions on the New Testament, my biggest issues, is why James the Just, the brother of Jesus, who was given command after his death, who Acts recognizes as the leader in Acts 15. James the Just is the leader of the church. He's killed in 62, and it's never mentioned in Acts. And we find out that Ananus was the one who killed him. Ananus is one of the leaders in the Jewish Roman War that gets killed early on by the Zealots. But in 62, about 3.5 years before the war, he killed James the Just. And it's said in Josephus that it was not lawful for Ananus to assemble a Sanhedrin without the consent of the leadership that was controlled by Rome. Essentially Agrippa II was part of that. And another one of my biggest mysteries to me is we see Caiaphas, the high priest, as a persecuting power. We see Ananus as a persecuting power. Now they answered to Rome. Rome appointed the high priest, but Gamaliel, who was um, who is the was the Nasi of the Sanhedrin. He descended from Hillel. Hillel, the elder, which I have a series on, was the Nasi of the Sanhedrin, very benevolent and very much, on the side of mercy against, when it would come to legal issues. I've said my series, he would be very much on the side of mercy and just being a rational thinker. And a lot of his values would line up with the teachings of Jesus, the teachings of Paul. And so, Paul says he's at the feet of Gamaliel in Acts. That was his teacher. And we see Gamaliel's mentality here, which is the same as Hillel in Acts 5. It says, keep away from these men and let them alone, for if this plan or this undertaking men will fail. But if it is of God, you will not be able to overthrow them. You might even be found opposing God. So Gamaliel in Acts 5 says, talking about the Christians here, he says, leave them alone. He's not trying to kill them or get rid of them or persecute them. And he's the leader of the Sanhedrin. He's the Nasi. So, I think Hillel, when it was issues of politics, he didn't, I think what happened was that this whole system was really hijacked by Rome and Herod, and it's just on the one hand you have Gamaliel saying leave him alone, but then you have a Sanhedrin being assembled to kill James. So that's a big mystery to me, but we have to know is there's another side to the story. The leader of the Pharisees, Gamaliel, who's the Nasi of the Sanhedrin, his philosophy was leave them alone. God will work it out. That's very much in line with Hillel, and very much in line with that branch of Judaism. There's other influences in Judaism. There are other Pharisees. I'm not saying they're all of that mentality, but I think it's significant. It's something that people overlook or are not aware of, but it's right there in the scripture. Anyway, this will be point 5 and the last one. Great wealth and the center of trade and commerce. So, the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet and bedecked with golden jewels and pearls. Now, someone said on the objections, well, this is the garments of the high priest, Ezekiel or Exodus 28. Again, you're not reading the details, the fine details. There's no mention of pearls in Ezekiel 28, and purple, scarlet, and gold were just symbols of wealth in the ancient world, not just for the high priest, but for anything. Let me just, I had it queued up here. I just responded to this. Yeah, here it is. You got Pliny the Elder, Tyrian purple of rich glowing tint, incredible beauty. The price of these fabrics is enormously high, and for this reason, purple has come to be the badge of rank and high station. Seneca. Okay. Do you ask, what is the cause of our madness? This is that we do not regard as good that which is, this is a Roman, which is really good, but think that a golden bit or a purple robe and all the rest of that gangrenous ostentation are what constitute the good life. So those are some early sources there, just, Roman sources just saying, hey, purple was something that was, yes, the high priest wore, but it wasn't exclusive to the high priest. Gold and jewels and things like that was just, again, it's another symbol of Rome's wealth. The cargo is significant. And the merchants of the earth weep and mourn for her, since no one buys their cargo anymore. Gold, silver, jewels, pearls. So the silver and pearls and fine linen and purple in 1811 through 19 go back to Revelation 17:4. So the same type of exports and cargo is tied to the woman who's arrayed in these things. The woman is the city, She is the one that's exporting these things and selling these things, and that's how she gained her wealth. We have to know is Jerusalem did not gain their wealth by these types of exports. Could they have had them? Yes, but that's not how they got wealthy. It was, I'm going to read a quote here by Rome and Jerusalem again by Martin Goodman, The Clash of Ancient Civilizations. Pilgrimage ensured that Jerusalem was an international city despite its distance from the sea and its isolation from the mainland trade route. The countryside around Jerusalem was undoubtedly farmed intensively, but such agriculture was hardly in itself the basis of the city's astonishing prosperity in the century preceding its destruction in 70 AD. Jerusalem's greatness in the time of Jesus was the result not of victory in war or success in commerce, political intrigue, or the harnessing of natural resources, but of the religious fervor of millions of Jews living throughout much of the eastern part of the Roman Empire and beyond. We know that this was going on. They have three pilgrimage feasts: Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles. We see them coming by the Josephus gives us a number. It's over some crazy millions in his writings about them coming to Passover, and we see Jesus, in the temple with the money changers and that conflict there. They were getting their wealth through pilgrimage, through all uh, the people from throughout the Roman Empire and beyond. In Acts, we see that. We see them coming from all over, devout Jews coming to Pentecost. They had to go there and buy their and pay money, for their sacrifices. So you can imagine that was where they got their wealth from. It's very easy to see just through scripture alone. You don't have to look into anything else. So really, let's look at the key exports for Rome. Some of these exports they uh they share it in common, but there's some that just you cannot. There's Siri again. Hold on a second. It's very annoying. Um, and again, in the debate, is like, oh, these things aren't that important. And some people have told me, oh, these things aren't that important. Like I said, if even one of these things does not fit, if one of these things does not fit Jerusalem, it cannot be Jerusalem. Why would the text why would the text that's why would the scripture say, well, this is the description, but then you come along and say, well, it doesn't fit, but still the rest of it fits, so that's good enough. We get 4 out of 5 is good enough. No, it must be 5 out of 5. So Rome's exports: gold, silver, precious stones, and pearls. Again, this isn't from I did this research independent of the Bible. All right. Fashion: fine linen, purple, silk, scarlet, ivory, costly wood, bronze, iron, marble, cinnamon, incense, frankincense, wine, olive oil. Jerusalem had some of these same things. But the main one here is slaves and chariots. Jerusalem lacked the extensive luxury trade that characterizes Rome in Revelation 18. Jerusalem: frankincense, myrrh, spices for temple rituals, olive oil, wines, and grains. And people know about this. Those who try to that have done the research, like Don Preston, and I've even seen some people in the chat saying, well, there was a slave trade, there was a block, there was a part of Jerusalem where they traded slaves. Or let's look at that. Okay. How did Rome get into this slave trade? How is Rome selling people? It's sick. Well, warfare. She got her slaves Rome got their slaves through warfare, through piracy and raids. They were even sick enough to be breeding people. Within the Roman Empire, slaves were also bred for sale. It's sick. Large estates and urban households might raise children born to slaves specifically for the purpose of selling them. These homegrown slaves were often considered more valuable because they were already integrated into Roman culture. Now we see even in the Old Testament, there's slaves, but it's a whole different reason. It's a whole different method, and they're released at a certain point. With the Jubilee. Rome is totally different. They were in business. This was their business. They got them through these sick ways, through tribute, and the slave markets were sold in large markets major cities like Rome, Delos, and Ephesus. Ephesus, right? We know that. Um, so did slavery exist in Judea? Well, it existed as it did in most parts of the Roman Empire. You're part of the Roman Empire, and they're selling slaves everywhere. It's it's you know it's like if you live in America, right? We have certain franchises that where they're one state, they're in all the states. Um, and it says under Roman rule, particularly after the establishment of Judea as a Roman province in 6 CE, the influence of Roman economic practices, including the slave trade, would have permeated the region. Romans might have brought slaves in Jerusalem, particularly during times of political unrest when captives were taken and sold into slavery. The trade routes passing through Jerusalem would occasionally see the movement of slaves either as part of military conquest or through local and regional trade networks. But here's the number one reason. And I didn't even bring this up in the debate, didn't have time. Well, the Jerusalem itself was sold into slavery. You know how many people they got out of the Jewish Roman War? How are you going to say that she was a major player in the slave trade? Well, again, that's another point. Here's my main reason. We get to the point. Let's just say, obviously, the perspective from the scripture here, from John, from the writer, is that this is not a good thing. Slavery is not a good thing. She's being judged for her slavery. So would it make sense? Let's just say that it is Jerusalem, and Jerusalem is being judged for her harlotry and for her slave dealings. So you're going to tell me that um, a bigger slave trading entity comes in and destroys that one, and they're the good guys, and no judgment is ever given back to them? Isn't that the cycle we always see in the Old Testament? That one nation destroys another, but then judgment comes upon them. So you're saying that if this isn't Rome, then there's not any prophecies of Rome being paid back for all the evil, for putting all the for destroying Jerusalem, right? If we're going to follow the model of the Old Testament, wasn't Babylon destroyed after as punishment? That was the instrument that destroyed Jerusalem, but then later, in graphic detail and rich language in Isaiah 13, we see Babylon being destroyed. People will say this isn't a big deal at all. But we see in Revelation 18:17 through 18. In 1 hour, all this wealth had been laid waste, and all shipmasters and seafaring men, sailors, and all whose trade is on the sea, stood far off and cried out as they saw the smoke of her burning. What city was like the great city? So it says here that they saw it. And there is another option for a port. There's Jaffa Port, which is closer. It's about 35 miles away instead of 50 miles away like Caesarea. But again, I'm going to the authority. Don Preston here says in Is This Babylon book, Israel's importance as a world trader is indicated by the building of the port city of Caesarea. Herod the Great built an artificial seaport where none had existed. He says, undoubtedly, many of the precious goods mentioned in Revelation 18 flowed into Jerusalem from Caesarea. Well, there's no way that you're seeing smoke from Caesarea 54 miles away, something like that. It's something like 54 miles away. Jerusalem sits at a high elevation. There's hills and all kinds of stuff that would have gotten the line of sight. And it's just, you're not seeing it something from 50 miles away. Rome, on the other hand, had a port, Ostia. And so I have these in walking times. So even if you were to walk, this is modern roads and where it is now, as it stands now, it would take you almost 2 days, a day and 19 hours to walk from Jerusalem to Caesarea. Rome to Ostia is about 8 hours. The mileage difference is about Rome is 15 miles from a port. Jerusalem is 54 miles, 50 some miles from Caesarea. And to put it in more perspective here, not only is the port is the Mediterranean where the port would be, not only is it closer, about 3 times closer in Rome than Jerusalem is to Caesarea, But the Tiber River, this is the key, runs from the city to the Mediterranean. So you could literally have shipmasters flowing in their boats from the Tiber River to the sea. They could have, the city would have been visible. It's flat in this area. It does not sit at an elevation like it's not the same type of terrain, so it's very doable. I'm not saying that it happened. I'm saying that if you were going to give this vision of shipmasters seeing the smoke of the city burning, it could not fit Jerusalem. It could not fit Jerusalem. It could only fit Rome. Just take a look at it. Right? Now, this is a second century depiction. I found a first century one, but it's too hard to see. But this is the same setup it was. I mean, they added some stuff to it, but again, the key is that Tiber River. Tiber River was always there. The Tiber River flows from the city out to the Mediterranean, to the port of Ostia. I'll close with this. Some questions to consider. Is Revelation anti-Roman? Is it pro-Jewish and anti-Roman? I think it is. Who was John banished? We know John was banished by Rome. So if John was banished by Rome, wouldn't he be kind of anti-Rome? So in order to say that it's Jerusalem, you'd have to say that it's very pro-Rome, because Rome is the instrument. Rome is the one who brings about this relief that this idea of the kingdom of the world becoming the kingdom of our Lord Jesus, of Jesus Christ. Let me read that again. Well, you know the passage. The big picture of Revelation is that the kingdoms of the world will become the kingdoms of Jesus Christ. And if you are going to say that it is Jerusalem that is destroyed by Rome, you'd have to be pro-Roman. And I don't see how John, who's banished by them and seeing Nero persecuting Christians, would think that way. That's just my opinion. But if the big question is if by destroying Jerusalem, which is Babylon in that view, if destroying her brings relief to persecution, right? Did it happen? Not even close. 70 to 135 AD, war continued. This war that broke out in 66 did not end till 135. It went to Masada in 73, the Kitos War, and it ended with Bar Kokhba and a horrible destruction that completely pushed the Jews out of Judea into the north, and a more mass carnage, destruction, and death. Maybe even worse than the first one, because Josephus inflated his numbers. Around 600,000 dead in Bar Kokhba, and by Josephus' numbers, 1.1 million. But all you have to know is it was horrific, and does it seem like it would be the war to end all wars by destroying Jerusalem, and then war would just continue, and even in the same area? Didn't happen for the Christians either. After 70 AD, there were not systematic persecutions, but the Christians found themselves in a very odd spot, because Rome had understood the Jews, that they were exempt from worshiping to the emperor. There were ways that they could fulfill that. They did not have to keep certain laws, because Rome knew who the Jews were. Christians were a new thing, and so they were kind of like Jews, but they didn't follow the laws like the Jews did. So they had to worship the emperor, and when they didn't, there were consequences. And so for a time, it was kind of like, hey, it wasn't as systematic where you go out and go after the Christians, but if something came up, if an issue arose and they would not comply, they were killed. That's how Justin Martyr was killed. He was beheaded for failing to comply with the recognizing the Roman gods. I believe that's how it was. My memory serves me correct. But eventually it did come to systematic, and the Decian persecution from 249 to 251, and Diocletian and the Great Persecution from 303 to 11 was a very bad persecution. So it doesn't matter how long it came after 70. It happened, and it didn't. There wasn't any relief until the Edict of Milan in 313, and then eventually Constantine made Christianity the official state religion, and relief was granted. And so those same church leaders that were under persecution and had to worry about being killed by the empire, they became important. And it's interesting because, lastly, I had all the early church fathers, and it's, Irenaeus, Tertullian, Hippolytus, Victorinus, Commodianus, Jerome, Augustine of Hippo. He's a little later, but Lactantius, all, Rome shall be a desolation. Babylon, Rome should be a desolation. Babylon, therefore, in predicting the captivity of the people and the destruction of the temple, is used in this passage as a symbol of Rome. Jerome, Rome, the great whore, which sits on upon many waters, which has been the capital of the world in the same manner as Babylon was the capital of the Chaldean Empire, was the first to persecute the church, and therefore she is likened to Babylon. Rome, the author of such wickedness, is now extirpated and therefore deserves to perish. Irenaeus, the one who is still missing in the Roman Empire, will appear in the end, and after his reign, the kingdom of Antichrist will be established. After that, Babylon, that is Rome, will be destroyed. Tertullian, so too Babylon, and our own John, is a figure of the city of Rome. Hippolytus is interesting. What did you see and hear concerning Babylon? Arise and speak, for it sent you also into banishment. So, saying there, John was sent into banishment, and it just makes sense that the empire that sent him into banishment is what he's talking about. Victorinus, the seven heads are the seven hills on which the woman sits. That is the city of Rome. They're connected. The fact that Babylon is indicated to be the city of Rome is, we think, manifest. So these were early, but again, in the fourth century, by the 5th century, it eventually happens that the view switches because Rome becomes the empire, and so Rome is no longer thought of that way. So this view on Mystery Babylon changes throughout Christian history because of that. But anyway, that's a whole other thing in and of itself. But what's clear is that in the time period we're talking about, it's clear who it is. So anyway, I got to go. This is way longer than I expected to be, but I hope that even if you don't change I'm not looking to change your view, but I hope that you at least learn something, and this will motivate you to study these things a little closer. Anyway, got to go. God bless. Go in peace. Serve the Lord. Thank you.